Can you hear the sound of a child laughing in the darkness? Don't look for it. Run immediately. That is the shadow bush baby. And if you try to find it, you will never return. The shadow bush baby is a demon, but it was once an innocent baby, the baby of a brilliant young girl. This is the origin of the shadow bush baby. Whenever news broke that a girl had disappeared from St. Mary's Academy, everyone whispered the same thing. Whenever wealthy men needed young girls for their rituals, it was always girls from St. Mary's Academy. Those boarding school girls were wild. Well, not all the girls in St. Mary's Academy were bad girls. Grace was different. Grace was a pure soul. She never joined other girls to sneak out at night. While others partied with boys, Grace stayed behind studying her books. This alone made many girls hate her. They felt she was too holy and acting superior, like she was better than everyone else. Well, Grace was the golden child of the school. She was a foster child who was in the school on full scholarship. After both her parents were killed in a tragic car accident, the school director, Mrs. Williams, took Grace under her wing. Grace was exceptionally brilliant and the teachers adored her deeply. Whenever the school competed in academic competitions, Grace always represented St. Mary's Academy and she never disappointed them. But Grace was not completely innocent. She had a secret. Grace had a boyfriend, the school director's son. His name was David. Grace was 17 years old while David was 19. David was the son of the director. He fell for Grace the day she came to their house. When school resumed and Grace left for the dormitory, David found every excuse to see her. David had finished secondary school and was waiting for university admission. While waiting for his admission, David often visited St. Mary's Academy with his mullah, the director. Grace and David were deeply in love, but they kept their relationship completely hidden. The problem was that Grace and David were always meeting in secret places within the school compound. While other girls needed to climb over fences to meet boys, Grace did not need to. She only needed to hide in quiet corners to see David. So while everybody praised Grace for being a saint, she was not entirely that pure. One day, emotions overwhelmed them and they did what they should not have done. They both agreed to keep it a secret forever. David believed he truly loved Grace. 2 weeks after that special moment between Grace and David, David received his university admission letter. The next day, he came to the school and arranged to meet Grace in the storage room during prep time. When they met, David told her the exciting news, but it was devastating news to Grace. She broke down and sobbed when she heard he was leaving. David tried to comfort her. He promised her he would visit during every break and that nothing would change between them and that he loved her with all his heart. That night, emotions took over again and they made the same mistake once more. Soon after David left for the university, Grace continued her normal school life. 3 weeks after David left, Grace began to notice disturbing changes in her body. She started waking up with terrible nausea. She was constantly hungry and began vomiting frequently. At first, she dismissed it until one morning, the dormitory supervisor, Sister Margaret, noticed Grace vomiting and called her aside. She asked Grace to turn around and examine her carefully. After observing her closely, the supervisor took Grace straight to the school clinic. After the school nurse ran several tests, the devastating truth came out. Grace was pregnant. The supervisor looked at her in absolute shock and demanded, "Grace, tell me the truth immediately. Who is responsible for this?" Grace remained silent. The supervisor asked again firmly, "Grace, do you want to destroy your future? Who is the father?" Grace still refused to speak. The supervisor reminded Grace that she was an orphan and the only reason the director took her in was because she was intelligent and that being pregnant now could ruin her entire life. Grace still refused to answer. Left with no choice, the supervisor dragged Grace straight to the school director's office. The moment the director heard that Grace was pregnant, she stopped everything she was doing. She exclaimed in disbelief, if it was Sophia, I would not be surprised. If it was Jennifer, I wouldn't be shocked. But you, Grace." The supervisor sat quietly as the director interrogated Grace, but Grace still refused to reveal who got her pregnant. Finally, the director threatened to expel Grace from the school and revoke her scholarship immediately. That was when Grace finally spoke. She said softly, "David." The director frowned deeply. "Which David?" Grace replied quietly, "Your son, David." The director was absolutely stunned. She never knew David and Grace were involved romantically. That was when it suddenly made sense why David enjoyed accompanying her to school so much. After a long, heavy silence, the director spoke coldly. Grace, you want to frame my son? I took you in after your parents died, and this is how you repay me? You want to destroy my family's reputation? It will never happen. I will handle this myself, the director told her angrily. Then the director turned to the supervisor and the school nurse and told them sternly, this pregnancy must be kept absolutely secret. The supervisor was the director's loyal servant, so she agreed immediately. The nurse, on the other hand, was threatened. The director warned the nurse that if she dared reveal the secret, then the school board and everyone would know that the nurse once made a terrible mistake and gave a student the wrong medication that caused the student to die. Grace was quickly removed from the dormitory and taken to live in a small abandoned cabin far away from the student quarters. It was a lonely cabin built for the director, a place she used whenever she needed privacy around the school grounds. But the director never actually used that cabin anymore. It was neglected and filthy, but that was where Grace was imprisoned. Grace was separated from all other girls, but she was still allowed to attend classes. Despite all the efforts to keep the matter secret, rumors soon began to spread around the boarding school. One day, Sophia whispered to Jennifer, I heard Grace is pregnant. Jennifer frowned. That's impossible. Grace is a holy girl now. Sophia scoffed. Ha, so you think pretenders don't exist? Holy girl? Please, that girl is the biggest pretender of all. Jennifer became curious. We need to confirm this. So one afternoon, after classes, Sophia and Jennifer secretly followed Grace. They watched her walk toward the forest close to the school. They were confused. Where is she going? They whispered to each other as they followed her quietly from a distance. Soon, they saw Grace walking to a small, ugly cabin hidden deep inside the forest. Just as Grace was about to enter, they stopped her. Grace, where are you going? Grace turned around. The moment she saw them, she burst into tears. They were shocked. Why are you crying? What happened? They asked her gently. Grace led them into the ugly cabin and told them everything. She told them how she got pregnant for the director's son. She told them how the director said her son could never be held responsible. She told them how the director and the supervisor forced her to stay in this lonely cabin in the forest. She also told them that once the pregnancy reached 5 months, she would no longer be allowed to attend school at all. And finally, she told them that the director had plans to sell the baby once she gave birth. As Grace spoke, they started crying with her. As the three girls were talking and crying together, the director suddenly burst into the room and shouted at them furiously. What are you doing here? She demanded. She warned Sophia and Jennifer sternly. If anybody hears about this matter, the entire school will hear about your illegal abortions. Sophia and Jennifer froze completely. They were utterly shocked. How did she know they once had abortions? They asked themselves in terror. The director laughed coldly. You are surprised? I know everything. I am the school's director. I have eyes everywhere, she said menacingly. Fear gripped Sophia and Jennifer completely. They immediately agreed to keep quiet about everything. The director escorted them back to the school while Grace stayed in the abandoned cabin, still crying as usual. 6 months into the pregnancy, there was a strike at the university and David came back home. He was thrilled to be back and desperate to see Grace. But when he came to the school, he could not find her anywhere. Not at home, not in school. Grace had completely vanished. Confused and worried, David asked his mother directly, "Mother, where is Grace?" His mother snapped at him furiously. "I have been waiting for you to ask," she shouted. "So you have been sleeping with that girl?" David was shocked that his mother knew their secret. He and Grace had agreed to keep it hidden forever. The director, however, continued coldly. She told him that Grace had discovered she was pregnant and went for a back alley abortion, and that was how she died tragically. It was a complete lie, but David believed every word. He was absolutely devastated. He truly loved Grace with all his heart. He mourned her death for many years. Meanwhile, Grace was alive, heavily pregnant and abandoned, living in the forest with David's child growing inside her. The director had no pity whatsoever for her own grandchild. While Grace was living in the forest, she made an unusual friend, a mysterious woman known throughout the region. Everyone knew Mama Agatha was a powerful witch. She often came into the forest to perform sacrifices or to catch small animals for her dark rituals. When she noticed Grace was living in the forest alone, she was surprised. She always wondered what a schoolgirl was doing in the forest, but she tried to mind her own business. She said to herself, I do my rituals, another person can do theirs. But little by little, she started speaking to Grace, and from time to time she would check up on Grace, but never asked Grace any questions about what she was doing in the forest. Mama Agatha liked to mind her business, but she always brought food and fruits for Grace. One day, she came and Grace was crying uncontrollably. She held Grace tenderly and asked what the problem was. Grace told Mama Agatha everything that had happened to her. After listening carefully, Mama Agatha blamed Grace. She told her that instead of focusing on her studies, she chose to sleep with a man. Then Mama Agatha asked her seriously, do you want me to curse them for you? It will only take one small sacrifice and they would all be destroyed forever. Grace smiled sadly and replied, no ma, I really love David and I know he loves me too. He doesn't know about any of this. On the other hand, the university strike ended and David returned back to school. By then, Grace was already 9 months pregnant, lonely and suffering in the forest. The fateful day finally arrived. It was time for the baby to be born. Grace went into labor completely alone. She screamed and screamed in agony, but nobody came to help her. Grace suffered alone in unbearable pain. She managed to crawl outside the cabin, desperately hoping that someone would see her and help her. When the director eventually arrived to check on her, both Grace and the baby appeared lifeless. The director smiled wickedly. She said coldly, good. It is better you leave this earth. My son already believes you are dead, so it's better you actually die now. Then she said to herself, I would have made good money from selling this baby. But it is still fine. You both should leave this world so I can finally rest, the director added with no remorse. The director was cold-hearted and purely evil. Unknown to her, Mama Agatha had come that same time to check on Grace, and she hid behind a large tree to make sure the director did not see her. She heard every single word the director said. She was shocked that the director was this wickedly heartless. Mama Agatha said to herself, I am a witch, but I am not evil like this woman. While Mama Agatha was hiding and watching, the director left Grace and the baby lying there and simply walked away without a care. As the director walked away into the distance, Mama Agatha came out of her hiding place. She rushed to Grace and discovered that Grace was not actually dead. She was only extremely weak and desperately needed medical help. The baby was also not dead, just very weak and barely breathing. Mama Agatha tried to carry both of them away to safety, but suddenly she heard footsteps and recognized the voice of the director approaching again. Quickly, Mama Agatha grabbed the baby and hid deep in the bushes. When the director returned with the supervisor and some male workers, she searched around frantically. She did not see the baby anywhere. She was genuinely shocked and disturbed. She told the supervisor that the baby was no longer there. The supervisor was worried and extremely uncomfortable, but she did not dare speak up against the director. The director didn't really care though. As long as nobody could link the baby to her family, she was satisfied. In her twisted mind, it was not the first time girls from St. Mary's Academy were known to be rebellious and promiscuous, so Grace was no different from the others. She instructed the workers to bury Grace immediately. The supervisor was horrified, but as usual, she kept completely quiet. The workers buried Grace right there in the forest, but Grace was not actually dead, so technically Grace was buried alive while still breathing. Mama Agatha watched everything in horror. After they all left, Mama Agatha took the baby home and tried desperately to take care of her, but the baby did not improve. Every single day, the baby grew weaker and weaker despite all her efforts. One terrible morning, Mama Agatha woke up and discovered that the baby had stopped breathing. She was deeply pained and filled with rage. In anger and overwhelming grief, Mama Agatha made a dark decision and went to Grace's grave in the forest. She performed a powerful forbidden ritual. She called upon the tortured spirit of Grace and reminded her that she had been buried alive unjustly. She called on her vengeful spirit to take over the body of the baby and return to the world to avenge her cruel death. Suddenly, a violently strong wind blew through the forest. Heavy rain began to fall. Thunder struck loudly and repeatedly, and immediately the baby began to cry with an unnatural, chilling sound. That was how the shadow bush baby was born. The conditions for the ritual were clear and permanent. The baby would become half spirit and half human forever. Immediately the ritual was completed, the baby grew several inches taller within seconds and began to walk almost immediately with unnatural movements. If you saw this creature, you would think it was a small adult with stunted growth. Its fingernails were extremely long and sharp like claws. Its hair was thick, wild and bushy, almost completely covering its glowing eyes. Mama Agatha, the witch, had transformed the baby into a supernatural monster. The only person the creature knew and obeyed was her. Mama Agatha then sent the shadow bush baby back to the school grounds to avenge itself and its mother. The shadow bush baby mostly lived in the forest around the school, and sometimes while passing near the forest at night, you would hear it call your name and laugh wickedly, begging for help. Never answer. Never help it. Never follow the sound. This demon child began tormenting the director relentlessly. At night, the director would hear the sound of a child laughing and crying simultaneously. "Help me! Find me! Help me!" But she would never see anybody when she looked. The supervisor was not exempted from the torment. She also started hearing the laugh and cry of a child echoing through the hallways. One night, while doing dormitory inspection rounds, the supervisor heard a child laughing maniacally. The girls in the dormitory heard it too, but faintly. But the supervisor heard it much louder right beside her ear. She heard the child calling her name repeatedly. The supervisor started acting completely insane and the girls were terrified. She started screaming hysterically, "A child is calling my name. It's laughing at me. Help me! Help me!" The supervisor was going completely mad before their eyes. The girls called for help urgently and the supervisor was taken away to a psychiatric hospital. The girls were confused and frightened. They were also hearing the sound of the child, but not as intensely as the supervisor experienced it. From that terrifying day, girls in the boarding school began calling the mysterious presence the shadow bush baby. But the shadow bush baby was not finished with its revenge yet. The director was still walking free. Sometimes while moving around the school campus, especially after dark, the director would hear a child laughing in the shadows. Sometimes she would even see the shadowy figure of a small child watching her, but nobody around her could see what she was seeing. She knew something supernatural was wrong, but she did not understand it yet. She deeply regretted that she should have searched for the baby that day and made sure it was truly dead. She was terrified for her own life after knowing what happened to the supervisor. One evening around 6 p.m., as the director was about to leave the school premises, she saw it again clearly. The shadow bush baby standing directly in front of her, staring with glowing eyes. She screamed in terror and asked the schoolgirls around her frantically, "Can you see it? Can you see that child?" They replied nervously, "No ma, we don't see anything." She shouted again desperately, "Can you hear the laughing?" The girls answered honestly, "Yes ma, we can hear a child laughing somewhere, but we cannot see anything at all." The director started shouting like a mad woman, I will confess everything." In the presence of the security guards, some students and some teachers, she told them everything that happened to Grace in shocking detail. She told them how Grace got pregnant for her son David, how she locked Grace in the abandoned cabin inside the forest for months, how Grace died giving birth alone, how she buried her alive. Everything came pouring out. The director was acting completely erratic and insane. Then she suddenly started running blindly in terror. That was how she ran directly into a moving truck on the main road. The shadow bush baby had successfully avenged its mother's death. But the shadow bush baby was still a roaming demon, half spirit, half human, forever cursed. Be careful of the evil you commit, because you can create a monster that will torment people long after you are gone. Grace had avenged her death through her baby, but now Grace's tormented soul was fused inside her baby, and together they had become a demon. The once most intelligent girl was now a monster trapped inside her own baby. The shadow bush baby continued to live in the forest, tormenting schoolgirls at night and harming evil adults who crossed its path. 5 years passed. Mama Agatha the witch was now very old and dying, about to leave the world. When she remembered the shadow bush baby, she felt deep pity for the monster she had created and decided to give it a final gift. She went to the forest and summoned the shadow bush baby and gave it a beautiful golden mirror. She said, "This mirror will be your gift to the world. Anybody who can take this mirror and withstand your laughter for 7 nights straight will become incredibly wealthy beyond imagination. You are now a demon and you will haunt this world forever. But I also want you to be a strange blessing to the brave. Remember this, you are both curse and gift." But this was not truly a gift or a blessing, because anybody who takes the mirror and cannot withstand the terrifying laughter of the shadow bush baby for 7 complete days and nights will either go completely insane or die a horrible death. So, the big question remains, who will be greedy and brave enough to take the shadow bush baby's mirror?